Hello and welcome to the first video Orange podcast. Orange Guy here coming at you, and today I wanted to talk about the past and the present and the future and everything in between. Um, let's start with the present. There's a guy who I respect a lot. He writes for the music industry. He actually has a podcast on Ryko. His name's Bob Lefsetz, and he's always regaling the music industry and those in it as being way behind the times and very undigital, and most executives barely being able to open their own email. And I'm a record executive, and I can open my own email. I call myself, what a lot of other people term as an early adopter. You know, I have an iPod. I've had it for quite a while now, a couple of years. It's a 40 gig. It's almost full. And I use a PDA. There's one here. It's not a new one, but I use it. And I have a digital camera. I take all of Orange's live photographs that you see on our website. And I'm talking to you using an iSight and a PowerBook, and I'm kind of like the IT guy around the office. But I'm not here to talk about me. I'm here to talk about the past. And I'm going to talk about Led Zeppelin. So what does all this digital stuff have to do with the past and Led Zeppelin? Excuse me, my eyes itchy. Well, I was thinking what I would talk about, especially to any viewers who are, say, under the age of 25, who are into bands like Led Zeppelin and the Heritage Acts, the Aerosmiths of the world, and Pink Floyd, and Deep Purple, and the Beatles, of course. You can probably see some Beatles stuff behind me. Everything's so accessible now, and everything's so instant, and everything is, of course, digital and available, that what has been lost is the music experience of discovery. So I'm going to tell you a little story about my discovery of Led Zeppelin. So let's go all the way back to January of 1969. And there used to be a pull-out section in a local daily here called the Telegram, and the pull-out was called After 4. And it was, fairly hip for a daily. And I remember reading about this new supergroup that was coming out of England that was the supergroup to end all supergroups. So it was a period when, Al Cooper and Stephen Stills and Mike Bloomfield had put super sessions together, and all these so-called supergroups. There was actually a local one in Toronto called Rhinoceros. It was made up of guys from different bands. But I read about this band put together by this guitar player who had played with Jeff Beck and the Yardbirds. Oh no, actually Jeff Beck and this guy, Jimmy Page, had played with the Yardbirds. And it was called Led Zeppelin. And what I read intrigued me. So shortly thereafter I made my way down to Sam the Record Man. And for those of you who don't know Toronto or live in Toronto or have never been to Toronto, Sam the Record Man was the place to buy records. And it was the one place my parents allowed me to travel on public transit all the way downtown to go visit and come home, hopefully in one piece. And then I would take my $4 and buy an album. So I walk in, and I'm looking for Led Zeppelin. And on the front rack, I see an album. Literally, I see an album, and it looks like this. It's an album in cellophane. There's no cover. And next to this album, there's a little sign that says, "Come back later for the cover." Now, I've been to Sam's dozens and dozens and dozens of times. It's the first time I'd ever seen an album for sale that came just in plastic, and it was this very Led Zeppelin 1 album that for some reason came without a cover. Well, I took my coverless album home on the subway and the bus, and I went into my room and I put on my headphones, and my life changed, I think, from that moment on, because what I heard for the very first time was this. Okay, for anyone from Atlantic who is watching this, listening to this, that was exactly 30 seconds, which I believe I'm legally entitled to do. Good Times, Bad Times, first song off the first album by a band called Led Zeppelin. I listened to the whole album. I'd never heard anything like it before. I had grown up on the Beatles and the Beach Boys and everything that came before it, and this was something new. So I immediately got on my bicycle, pedaled around the neighborhood. First I went to Rowie Kurt's house. Rowie was, fairly into music. He wasn't the coolest guy in the street, but he was the closest. And I said, sit down and listen to this. He listened. He couldn't believe what he heard either. Then I rode over to Peter Danson's house and did the same thing with him. And Peter was a pretty cool guy. He turned me on to like Paul Butterfield and Jimi Hendrix for the first time. He was more roots. He wasn't really a pop guy. But, he probably told me how it was derivative blues, but he dug it. He just didn't want to admit it. And then I went home and just played it over and over and over and over again. A couple weeks later, how old was I? I was about, I don't tell you how old I was, but I was a teenager. But a couple weeks later, I make my way downtown back to Sam the Record Man. And I walk up to the floor manager, who was a tall, imposing man. I was always slightly afraid of him. I don't know why. And I went up to him and said, do you have the Led Zeppelin covers? And first he kind of looked at me. I bought the record without a cover. And he went, oh yeah, yeah. And they had these kind of sliding drawers below the bins. And he opens the drawer and he pulls out this. This very piece of cardboard I just showed you. And he said, here you go. Didn't ask, to see a receipt or anything, because obviously if I walked in asking for a cover, I probably didn't have one. And that's how I discovered Led Zeppelin, and that was my rather unique experience purchasing Led Zeppelin. And the point of the story is that these days, you don't have experiences like that. You don't have that sense of discovery. You don't get to make music your own and then kind of peddle it around to your friends and turn them on to it. Everybody hears everything at the same time. Everything's pushed at you at the same time. And that whole sense of discovery has been lost. And it's unfortunate, because that's how music organically grew. That's how an artist like Bruce Springsteen could have two really good albums that didn't sell, but there were obviously people talking. And it was sort of virally making its way into the consciousness of people's minds until Born to Run came along and blew it wide open. Artists aren't allowed that time to nurture their craft, to have people discover them. And that's what I miss about music now, is that you don't have that sense of discovery. And if you do discover something, you better discover it quickly, because it's going to get caught on to by everybody else in a real hurry. So that's it. That's my Led Zeppelin story, and I bid you farewell until the next Orange podcast. Have yourself a great musical listening experience.